Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from, but thank you for joining. Before we begin, a quick reminder that we have live closed captioning available throughout the entirety of today's event. On the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you should be able to have the option to turn closed captioning on. For those of you who may be new here, I know I am. My name is James Carey, and I am one of the event managers for Tech in Motion. Over 10 years ago, Tech in Motion was founded by staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment with the goal of bringing together the tech community to share ideas and inspire one another. We are constantly on the lookout for new event topics, passionate speakers, expert contributors, and more. So if you're interested in getting more involved in our community, you can click on the link that's going to be in the chat, but be sure to open it in another tab so you can check it out after today's event. Each year, Tech in Motion's Timmy Awards celebrate the best tech startups, managers, and employers for creating innovative products and fostering environments where tech professionals can really thrive. With 8 coveted tech award categories across major markets, the Timmys are a highly sought-after recognition for startups and Fortune 500 alike. If you haven't submitted your nominations, you are in luck. Our nomination deadline was just extended to May 24th. So be sure to visit techinmotion.com/Timmy-awards to nominate your top tech choices, even if that's yourself. Today, we're excited to delve into a critical conversation on cybersecurity essentials for 2024. Our discussion will cover a range of vital topics from the persistence of generative AI as both a tool and a threat in cybersecurity, to strategies for fostering behavioral change to reduce human risks. I look forward to learning from our esteemed panelists and exploring together how we can enhance our cybersecurity practices for a safer future. But first, I want to introduce Mark Riley, a cybersecurity leader within Motion Recruitment, to share his insights on the hiring market. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me. I just wanted to take a couple minutes, introduce myself, and talk a little bit about the cyber hiring market before we jump into today's discussion. My name is Mark Riley. I'm the Vice President of Cybersecurity Staffing Solutions here at Motion Recruitment. For those of you who don't know, Motion Recruitment is a North American IT staffing and recruiting firm who founded Tech in Motion in 2011 with the simple goal of giving back to the tech communities we serve. 10 years later, we're thrilled to see the community continue to grow and expand thanks to your support. This will come as no surprise, but the demand for security is still high, even with the economic headwinds that we face, as we have seen in the hiring market start to come back to life. With the cost of cybercrime predicted to reach $8 trillion in 2024, tech leaders can't afford to not prioritize their end-to-end security hiring strategy. A good example of that is the cost of the hack of United Healthcare, which cost the company over $850 million in the first quarter of 2024, and the total cost could reach $1.6 billion. In 2023, we have not only seen the continued need for application security engineers and DevSecOps folks, but we've also seen a big increase in demand for niche security roles. These roles are aligned to disciplines such as OT security, medical manufacturing, specialty product security engineers, and a big demand for cleared security folks supporting the DoD, subs, primes, new technology-focused companies that we've seen spin up. That being said, I would also like to offer myself and my team as a resource for anyone who is planning hiring or looking for a new role in the cybersecurity space. We'd be more than happy to talk more in depth about trends, salary ranges, or any other market data that we have. I'll drop my LinkedIn profile in the chat. Back to you, James.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. Some of those numbers are very staggering. Finally, before we begin with our featured panel for today, I want to take a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to drop them in the Q&A tab, and please upvote questions that you're interested in hearing about. Our panelists will do their best to answer as many questions as possible after our initial discussion. And we are recording the session today, so if you have to hop off early for any reason, we'll be sure to get you that recording. Now, without any further delay, I'm pleased to introduce to you the host for today's session, Christophe Foulon. Christophe is the founder of CPF Coaching and a seasoned cybersecurity professional. His passion is empowering cybersecurity leaders and businesses, guiding those who feel their careers have plateaued to achieve new heights of success. He's the author of multiple books, including Develop Your Cybersecurity Career Path, How to Break into Cybersecurity at Any Level, available now on Amazon, or you can hear from him on his podcast, Breaking into Cybersecurity. We are honored to have Christophe back hosting this conversation today, just as he did last year. Welcome, Christophe. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you very much for having me on today, James. It's a pleasure to be back and to have such a great group of panelists. First, we have Ryan Sahadeo, we have Mittal, and then we have Steve Gentry. I'll go around the room and have them introduce themselves. Ryan?
Thanks, Christophe. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Sahadeo. I've been a security professional for the last 13 years, specializing in security operations and GRC, and most recently have become an AI consultant. So I'm pleasure to be here with you guys today.
Parul?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Parul Mittal. I'm a vice president at Kroll with cyber strategy and risk. Background in a lot of DoD work, government related, but now a little bit more on the commercial side. So it's definitely a spectrum that I've had the pleasure of being a part of. I also have a master's degree from the University of Maryland within the study of cybersecurity, a graduate certificate in cyber technology, and a Security Plus certification. That's me.
Steve?
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm glad to be on this panel with the rest of this fantastic group. I have been in the security industry now for 25 of my more than 35 years of technology career, 3-time CISO, working on getting my 4th CISO gig currently. Been all over the board as well, background in 8 years in the defense and intelligence community, and then across the board in the private sector. So it's been last 14 years have all been SaaS. It's been fantastic.
It's crazy to think that we've already had 14 years of SaaS, but things are growing so quickly. With that, we always like to say that we drive our decisions based on data. Steve, what are some of the key outcome-driven metrics that you lean on when explaining or presenting cybersecurity to leadership?
I'm going to start off by talking what I don't focus on, and then get to start with what do we see all the time, and then kind of guide into that. So I remember when we started the audit committee at my last company I was at, and we had information out there of hey, this is what we want to talk about. This is what we're looking at. And it was all very minutia driven metrics, because that's what boards are used to seeing. That's what people get asked about all the time. One of the reasons why CISOs are often seen as a technical resource and not business leaders. So vulnerability metrics is not something I focus on. There is vulnerability metrics in there. It's related to a subset of other things, but I really loved what Phil Venables has presented out there. And if anyone wants to track down, it's you only get 3 metrics. What would you provide? And he breaks it down. And I've adapted it for my own mindset, but it's all about focusing on code, focusing on infrastructure, and focusing on data. I mean, we finally have gotten out of the mainstream of trying to build our perimeter, especially working at SaaS companies. The last 2 I've been at have both been beyond court models. I haven't had any server rooms to protect. The only infrastructure we've had has been, local wireless networks at an office. So getting away from that mindset of how are we protecting the perimeter, what are we doing to protect the data? And then breaking those metrics down from there. That can include risk-based activities around who's got access to it, what are they doing with it, where does it reside? Do you even have a data inventory of your environment? CMDBs have been around for longer than I can remember because I'm old, but they've been around for a long time, and we've always hated them, and they've never actually worked out to what a CMDB is supposed to do. So for me, I break that down. When I look at the code, it's not about, have we done secure code training for engineers, because most of what they're doing is actually not where our 0 days are coming from. It's, is our code in a protected environment? Can we, if something catastrophic happens, I was at Adobe when the big breach happened in, 2015? There was 3 in a row. I was there for the 2015, the third one, where literally the whole code base was compromised. So if we need to get our code base back, can we get it protected? Do we have a way of returning it? From an infrastructure standpoint, we talk about the resiliency, and we'll get more into this later. But that aspect of, can we start it from cold start? Can we bring our environment back from the beginning? Because we've got oftentimes us as CISOs get the DRBCP aspect put on there. So how are we able to bring this back? And I think it's funny that CISOs are actually the ones being asked about DRBCP instead of the CTO, whose team actually owns the infrastructure. But we're the ones being asked to guide and drive this environment. So I focus on those 3 things and break it down from there. And that allows me to have a risk-based or risk posture-based discussion with the board and with the rest of the executive team versus how many USB violations do we have, or how many, we've got 20,000 low vulnerabilities out there. Who cares? Like, what does that mean to our environment? It gives you no context. And so it's finding ways to give contextual information around the metrics you provided. Ask yourself the so what question. Like, we've got this data, so what? What does this mean? Does it actually, what can we do with it? How are we driving action? If you're not having an action-driven discussion around your metrics, then you quickly get put in the category of, great, we've got the security meeting. They're going to read off a bunch of slide decks to us. We're going to try and get through this as fast as possible. And then we're going to get them off the call because we don't care about what they're presenting. We can just say we've met with security and we've done our due diligence. And that way, when something bad happens, we can blame the CISO because they didn't give us enough information. We can fire them and have them prosecuted for all the bad things. So I know that's a lot to take, and I could have a whole conversation around metrics just in for a 1 hour, but I'll stop there and let my esteemed colleagues add anything if they've got something else they want to add to what they would do with metrics.
Parul, I'm sure as an external consultant, you often see a variety of different metrics in organizations that you help. What are some of the best ones that you recommend those that are growing in maturity start to look at and start to pay attention to?
Yeah, so one of the latest, most emerging threats is third-party vendors. As of 2022, according to an IBM report, and I'm sure this stat has gone higher, I just don't have it off the top of my head, but 19% of all data breaches, the root cause was third-party software. So a big focus in InfoSec committees at organizations has become, how compliant are our vendors? Are we doing the due diligence we should be doing before we're even bringing them on board? If this is a new process, how much are we backtracking on our already existing vendors and kind of ramping up to make sure we have some decent metrics to look at that, these vendors are, passing our security assessments with flying colors versus this one, okay, we'll accept the risk and we'll still keep them on board, but we want some promises and contingencies that in the next security review cycle, you will remediate these. And that's the only way that you can effectively stay on board as one of our vendors. So we see a lot of focus on that just based on, just this attempt at eliminating third-party risk.
Ryan, you mentioned that you've previously been a CISO, but now you're an AI consultant as well.
Correct.
How do you take it? How do you use AI to enable and drive some of the metrics?
So it depends on the layout of the organization that I've been a part of. I've had the privilege, if you want to call it that, to be working with a bunch of startups over the course of my career. And so I think the name of the game for a lot of people is AI, and eventually we'll get into the discussion later today about, the risks associated with that. But for me, it depends on the tools that I'm using. I've had the pleasure of working with a few different organizations and some of the SaaS tools that they offer companies. One of them in particular was Lacework, which was able to perform the functions of Splunk and Alien Vault and monitor your cloud environment, but then in real time be able to filter out false positives in order to give you the areas that you're supposed to focus on. And I found that it increased efficiency, and it helped streamline a lot of the workflows for security teams that I worked with, because it gave them a narrow roadmap to focus on instead of focusing on a wide variety of things that probably just don't even apply.
I think we lost you there for the last bit of your sentence, but Parul, in regards to driving overall awareness for response and readiness, what are some of your recommendations in that space?
Awareness and response for readiness. Yeah, so I think that revolves a lot around training and phishing simulations, those types of exercises. How many people within your organization are successfully bypassing these attempts at phishing emails to, whether it's steal your credentials, just have you click on the link and impact your environment accordingly. So that is a big focus in terms of metrics and overall awareness, response readiness, kind of knowing that baseline of where does our organization actually sit from a security knowledge standpoint. And then once you know your current state, you can build towards filling the gap that you might have. And always best to kind of have a goalpost to aim for, and that way you can actually create a roadmap towards getting to that point of awareness and response readiness. And also having, of course, a solid incident response plan that's tried and tested. You're doing tabletop exercises to actually ensure that the people involved in the incident response aspect know what are able to actually put it in practice, right? And are able to do it successfully.
Steve, earlier you mentioned that oftentimes organizations are going to come to the CISO for resilience. How do you drive awareness in that aspect and metrics around that?
So for me, I'm taking a couple of pieces of Parul said, and I'm going to add on to where I have taken them in my organizations. Like thinking about the third party, I'm less worried about the vetting of the third party. We still have our process that we go through. I just have seen a smaller return on investment because ultimately with third party, we always talk about trust but verify in the GRC space, except when it comes to our third party, because we have no way to verify without actually hiring people or doing corporate espionage into our vendors. We can't really know what information they're getting with them. So as we talk about resiliency, or as we're talking about these third parties that may have an impact on us, and this also goes to security awareness, which I think the whole security awareness piece and third-party risk, we've gotten too far into the transfer of risk aspect of it. It's bringing it back of like, okay, we have these third parties in, what data are they touching? What are they doing? And what's our risk posture around that? How are we protecting ourselves in case something happens to them? So worrying less about making sure we're still doing our due diligence and asking those questions and making sure they at least have a level of security in their environment as much as they're telling us. And then being able to highlight if we have risks. So on my metrics board, it will be, hey, these are the risk acceptance forms that have come through. These are where they stand on the vendors we have to validate. But again, ultimately, what I'm looking for on the resiliency side is this is the mitigation strategies we have in place in case something happens to them. This is what happens if this data gets lost. Like think about how many, I don't mean to throw Fastly under the bus here. This is a couple years back, but when Fastly went down, we literally you had a third of the internet. Slight exaggeration, but you had a huge swath of these tech companies that all were no longer able to do business because one vendor was no longer available. So whether I'm talking security awareness, whether I'm talking the infrastructure that we have in-house, or whether it's the third party, like you're using all your SaaS vendors because you have a beyond port model, stop focusing on that transfer and aspect of the security, start bringing those metrics in-house of, here's the third parties we have. Here's the part of the business that's impacted. So when you're building out that DR plan, and Parul 100% behind the tried and true. A lot of people go build IR plans and then never test them. And so it's just like great, you have a plan. Who knows about it? How do they know how to run through it? And it's amazing to me. But stop doing the transference. Start actually accepting the responsibility and looking at remediation and mitigation versus just hey, well, we did a third party review, we're going to hand it off. Or security awareness, where it's like, hey, we told people, we sent them through this training, we expect them to be security experts now that they've gone through this training, and never click on anything. It's why my team also knows that they can't use the word stupid user inside of our discussions, because we all want to. Like, I started my IT career back in '88. I have been through, I've had that mindset. I've had to break that mindset when I realized how bad of a mentality it was driving me towards the user base. And really, it was just bad processes in place on the IT side. bad processes in place on the security side that we're making them like, I can't remember my password because you want me to have a 35 character password with symbols and numbers and letters and capitals and like our brain's not wired for that. And so it's having that mindset of building something that's for the right base, and then putting metrics around that, like again, talking about how we're building a resiliency, how we're building that structure around those key components, but knowing what those key components are first.
Ryan, did you want to add anything to that topic?
No, actually, I think Steve covered it, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, that being said, Steve, I wanted to keep on you for a little bit. Why are CISOs, CTOs, chief security officers always so reluctant to add security, if not, sorry about that, to add security, if not at all, when you're starting out organizations? Why are they starting with this minimal protection model and just trying to bolt it on at the end rather than building it from the beginning?
Answer with an anecdote to start off with. So last year I was presenting with a couple attorneys at the Utah bar. So all attorneys that were there, and they were relating different instances. We were talking privacy and security and the changes, and specifically this was post Joe Sullivan investigation and conviction, and kind of talking about that thing. And one of the attorneys was talking about how he had been arguing with the SEC that they were going after the CEO, and he just kept harping like how the CEO was the one being targeted, and he felt bad. Like they have a CISO in place, and I'm like, this is that false mentality that we've seen with folks throughout especially with the Tim Brown situation with SolarWinds, that it's only the CEO's fault. Like, how come he didn't make, even in their statement, how come he didn't make the infrastructure team do these updates? Like somehow as CISOs, we have all of this authority. So one, it's not that we don't want to grow the teams. It's, do we have the authority, or do we have the resources in place? Are we seen as a business leader? And so I kind of said, I won't use the same word I used, but it was kind of like duck the CEO. Like, why does he feel like he should get out of having the same punishment that us as CISOs get when we're the ones being targeted without actually having the authority to do the role? So companies see us as a cost center. They don't want to give us the authority. And going through, as I'm interviewing in different roles, I've actually been looking at CTO positions as well based on my technical background. And it's interesting, as I'm interviewing, my CTO interviews versus my CISO interviews are very different. Like, I'll get asked going for a CISO role, like frontline questions. Well, can you configure a firewall? Do you know how to manage the EDR implementation? I'm like, hopefully I will never be doing that. If I'm bypassing my team to do that role, then we have a lot of problems. CTO wasn't asked, like, it was basic architectural discussions going through what I understood of the cloud implementations and giving my thoughts there. And then they immediately moved on to the business context. How do you define strategy? How do you roll out the business? How are you driving innovation? All the stuff that us CISOs are being asked to do, but we're first seen as the technical leaders first. So we want to hire resources. We want to grow them. And I feel really bad for those trying to break into the community, because if we get a headcount available to us, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go hire someone senior. We're not going to do entry level because we know we have limited resources. And so we're trying to get as big as bang for the buck to get the autonomy for people. So it's not that we don't want to hire. It's just, again, cost center. They want to have a self-contained team. They want to say that they have an organization in place to do the checkbox, because they're still struggling with understanding the value of security. And therefore, when we have resources available to us, we're going to try and hire as senior as we can. And then this also leads where we have all these people complaining that they can't get roles, they can't get hired, but they're all trying to break in for the first time. And it's causing this vicious cycle where we say we don't have enough people, but we've got a lot of junior people. We just have to take the time to be able to mentor them, but we also have to have the capacity. We have to have the organization in place to help bring them up.
Parul, what are some of the ways that you could drive incremental improvement or continuous improvement using metrics and using data, as well as incremental headcount, like Steve mentioned?
Yeah, I can't speak too much to the incremental headcount aspect, not super involved on that side, but I do work with some, CISOs, kind of play a vCISO role in some of our engagements here. And the recommendation is usually in terms of incremental improvements, it has to be based off of, again, where you started, where do you want to go? So one thing I would add to that is looking at the question one more time. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
If you don't have if you don't have anything, that's okay. Did you have something? I just didn't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead. We can keep going.
Okay. Ryan, any additions there?
It definitely revolves around the baseline for the organization. You'll find a lot of organizations when they hire for initial roles, they have an idea for what the business wants to do. Maybe they relay that to HR. Sometimes they just don't understand the need of what they're actually hiring for. So then when they try to increment the head count while still balancing it within their budget, you'll find that they try to loop in multiple job descriptions under one role, and then you try to look for a unicorn that just does not exist. It happens a lot between GRC and engineering, for example. You'll have a lot of people who are engineers that just do not care for GRC, and then you have people that are GRC focused that want to learn the engineering, and then sometimes that doesn't jive, if you will, with the business, and so they just choose not to increment. But I think it's a partial discussion on, do they understand what they're looking for, and then do they have the budget to then hire for those people?
So speaking of hiring, I'll throw this out to the group for whoever wants to tackle it first, but what are some of the best certifications to start to hire folks?
I'll go first. Okay. I think Security Plus seems like a pretty baseline certification when entering the industry. Just a full range, broad spectrum across controls from like access control to how do you handle multi-factor authentication. So at least like a basic knowledge to be able to enter the industry. I can't speak to how fruitful that is when applicants come in with a certification like that. Maybe Steve or Ryan would be better suited. But yeah, I've seen that be a pretty common entry level cert.
I love how CISSP also gets thrown out in job descriptions. You have to have 5 years of experience or 4 years and a degree, but you have to like, hey, we want you to have a CISSP even though you've never worked in this field, which you can't actually get. You can get like, hey, well, provisionally, let's say that you pass the test, but you don't get it until you hit the experience requirements. I'm like, oh my God. So to me, it also depends on the path you want to take. Yes, CISSP is still the baseline. If you're going in the SaaS world, I would do the CCSP instead, which is the cloud version of the CISSP. I will also warn people, don't over-certify yourself, because then you are a cost center who's coming in to take away dollars when you have like 20 certs that need to get re-upped each year, and that you've got to go through all the CPEs, and they're coming like, we're going to look at you as a hiring manager going, okay, you are going to be spending a lot of time in dollars just trying to maintain your certs, and I want you to work. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but like, be careful of how many certs you end up with. If you believe your path and you know yourself well enough that your path is going to be leadership. So you've gotten some technical certs, Security Plus, working your way through. Again, if you're trying to get into the SaaS world, go do AWS, GCP, and Azure's certifications that they have out there. A lot of them are free that you can sign up for and go through and understand the cloud environment. But if you know that your leadership is going to be your path, the best certification you get is not actually a certification, it's an MBA. Because ultimately, the higher you go in your organization, the less it's about the technology, and it's more about, do you understand how this integrates in the rest of the business? So the fact that they're coming out with like certified CISOs just cracks me up. Like, if you want to be a CISO, your best certification is going to be an MBA.
Ryan, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think in addition to the CISSP being a benchmark, a lot of times you see that in entry-level roles, but then you also see some of the other ones, right? Like CISM, CISA, CRISC. And it speaks to the point I made earlier about companies just not really understanding what they need. I would say for anyone looking to break into the industry, you can go the Sec Plus route. It's pretty handy for government. In fact, government, that's their baseline. ISC Squared recently created their certified in cybersecurity. That's usually a pretty good one that also speaks to a certain baseline, but it's also free for their promotion of getting 1 million people certified in cybersecurity. And I definitely agree with Steve that as you get higher in your organization and as you continue to grow along your career, figuring out the certifications that are going to help you along your path are very, very important. Having 10 or more certifications really just says that you're good at taking a test. It really doesn't mean anything else beyond that. Myself, I actually got started my career without any certifications whatsoever. I was just able to kind of talk my way through. And then now, as I continue to get more advanced in my career, I picked certifications that are aligning with my background, as opposed to just doing 10 or 15 different certificates just because I could.
One last thing I'm going to throw out there, and this is to potentially any hiring managers who are on with us. Stop the nonsense in the job description. Ryan, with the whole unicorn comment, 100%. It is crazy to me. Like, there's all these people reaching out like, hey, we've got this CISO role. Well, it's a director or it's a senior manager. I'm like, that's not a CISO. I'm like, I'm sorry. They're like, go get a vCISO if you're looking for someone to do fractional work. That's a fantastic route to take. The vCISO community has gotten strong. That this is also a developing thing where there's a lot more starting to get better at actually vetting what a vCISO should look like. And so it's fantastic. Like, go that route if that's what you're looking for. Don't take someone who's a frontline manager and say, okay, now you're a CISO. So pay attention to what you're looking for, know what you want. On CISO job descriptions, you shouldn't be putting a CISSP when you're also saying you want 15 to 20 years of experience, because like if they've got 15 to 20 years of experience, I've let all of my certs lapse. Because there's like if you're looking for me from a certification aspect, then we're having the wrong discussion and I can scope you out of my job search. So just be thoughtful. Like, think, do you really need them to have a 4-year degree? What certifications do you want them to have? What certifications are you willing to help them get? So be thoughtful in your job descriptions. Stop the nonsense and stop blaming HR for bad job descriptions when it's the hiring manager who's writing them.
I'll take this moment to plug a nonprofit that I support, Whole Cyber Human Initiative. What we do there is we kind of provide a holistic approach of open source training. So you don't have to go take a cert for it. You actually get the training, and we link to cloud resources and all sorts of different things. So check that out, Whole Cyber Human Initiative. With that, Parul, you mentioned earlier the concept of third parties and managing third parties. How do you manage the resiliency when working with third parties, and kind of give specific examples that you want to recommend?
Yeah, so with resiliency with third parties, and I'm interpreting that as kind of you saying we're making sure that they're to some degree in compliance, doing what we want them to do with keeping our data safe. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to interpret it. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, yes, that's a great way. How would you recommend that?
Yeah. So with third parties, and I think Steve, it was an interesting point that you mentioned with, it's kind of hard to validate unless you're doing espionage or sending someone in to really check what your third parties are. And I think that's totally valid. Like, to what extent can you really check a third party vendor before you're bringing them on board? So some, like the best case scenarios, maybe you're getting their SOC 2 report, their SOC 2 type 2 report, or type 1, but preferably type 2, right? You're being able to see what other auditors said about them. And sometimes vendors are forthcoming with that information, but oftentimes they're not. They are not looking to hand out all of their documentation to you without contingencies and promises that they are getting paid to be one of your vendors. So from a resilience standpoint and ensuring that your third parties are doing what you want them to do, it does kind of become like a give and take situation. Like, sure, maybe you're bringing them on board, but you're making note of their risks. You're making ideally in a risk register that is being monitored and controlled by someone within your organization or a team in your organization. And then you're following up on those risks. And it does sound like very manual work that requires a lot of resource focus. And so that can be a big trade-off for some organizations that say, hey, we don't have that type of team or resources to be able to do this. But the best case scenario is that you are looking into this. And the bottom line kind of comes down to, does your leadership agree that is that, 19+% of data breaches, and each data breach on average, by the way, costs $5 million USD, right? So this is looks very different in terms of a number if you're looking at another country in the world, which we've seen some experiences of. So if leadership says that is enough of a reason for me to really put in some controls around which vendors are being brought into our environment and to what degree they're accessing our network, then you have some ground to be able to put in, the resources that are doing the check-in, saying, hey, did you fix what we wanted you to do last year? And if so, then you can stay on board. If not, we need to start looking elsewhere. We need to shop for other vendors. So that becomes a big part of kind of managing the resiliency of the vendors that you have in your space, and are they good enough to stay there?
Maybe I'll throw this one to Ryan. Ryan, what approaches have you found to be helpful for continuously managing the threat, whether that be from SaaS vendors, from other vendors, or just your own external threat environment?
That's a good question. So I'll take it from the SaaS background, just because that is my background. I would say that in the case of, let's say, for example, we'll stick on the topic of third parties and fourth parties. Sometimes the relationship happens where a higher level executive brings in this vendor to the organization, and then security gets brought in last into the process to evaluate. What happens at that point is that contracts are already signed, budget's already been approved. At this point, it becomes a check the box. And then by that point, really, security is advising leadership. That's really our whole job. And so if you're not willing to take our recommendations into consideration, what's the point of having this in the process? With regards to that being said, people tend to use certifications like SOC 2s, reports like SOC 2s, ISO certifications, and the like to kind of evaluate environments and evaluate posture. If you're not handling the compliance aspect of it, of constantly monitoring this on an annual basis at minimum, there's going to be some creep that gets driven in there over time. And a lot of companies, I forget what the statistic is now at the top of my head, but tend to lack to follow up. And then they realize that somewhere down the line, they should be bringing in another organization to kind of compensate. Talking from like an external point of view, it depends on what aspect of the organization you're looking at. So for example, if I'm looking at a vendor who's handling monitoring of my electronic networks on my SaaS backend, like AWS or Azure, to what extent are they plugged into the environment, right? What are they able to access? What are the access controls that we have in place to limit that scope to only what they need? If it's a SaaS tool, same kind of concept. For example, one of the organizations I've been a part of, we created auditor access, and we configure that specifically to the things that the auditors would need to look at versus, just giving them full access to the environment, which a lot of companies tend to do because they figure creating specific guidelines or guardrails around what needs to be protected is too much work.
And a lot of this goes back to that whole so what aspect in reporting metrics with their third parties. Like the rest of the board is like, okay, security got brought in last. Why do we care about these vendors? And until you can give them the context of your metrics. So this was what I was working on in the last organization and putting together. It takes time. You got to have different tools in place to be able to pull this data. But it was, here's the tools we were bringing in. Was security brought in at the beginning? Was security brought in at the end? What organizations in the company were doing the purchasing? So what executives actually have the most risky applications? So being able to tie these third-party purchases back to the specific executive, saying, okay, we got marketing. By the way, marketing's got, we always talk about engineering, especially in the SaaS world. We always talk about engineering as this big risk factor, but we forget that we've got this whole go-to-market strategy with sales and marketing who run fast and loose with personal data. And there's a lot more stringent global privacy laws than there are security laws out there. So being able to take those things, okay, this is the executive, this is how many risky applications they have or they've brought in. Here's the data that's compromised, and here's the rules that are associated with it. So this is all being able to connect the dots for the rest of the executive team on why this is important. Answer that so what question to them. Because if we're just presenting metrics of like, hey, we brought in a bunch of third parties, the rest of the executive, they don't understand. This is not a world that any of them have ever had to play with. And even looking at security vendors, like most security vendors are actually started by either a former CTO or by a salesperson. They're not actually being started by CISOs. That's a small percentage of the security firms out there. So even our security vendors they're not giving us information as security professionals to be able to help provide that context. So it's our job to be able to connect those dots, which is why I go back to having your MBA is more important. Like being able to have that context and driving the business correlation versus just giving them data on and being clear about what we're trying to accomplish. So, and I'm going to keep coming back, answer the so what question for them on why this resiliency matters, how this third party could end up having a major problem if we end up losing them, that this is going to impact our product, this is going to impact our companies. So you know who your critical vendors are.
Speaking of vendors that usually are outside the organization and have tons of information, Ryan, AI, this is a big factor today. They consume a ton of data and they're usually external of the organization, usually as SaaS today. What are some of the ways that we can work to protect that?
I think everyone who would potentially answer this question is going to have a different answer, right? It starts with training. It starts with having everyone understand kind of what the functionalities of Gen AI are as it stands today. Most organizations and customer-facing AI applications are somewhat generative in nature. You put in a prompt, you get a response. None of the major organizations, unless we're like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, have robust cloud servers that hold much more larger AI applications that could potentially do damage. That isn't to say that outside AI apps don't spring up all the time. They do. You can see them. There are a dime a dozen on the internet these days, and they can cover every single function you can think possible. With that being said, I found that starting with the baseline of having everyone kind of go through a fundamental AI training and understand like what they're allowed to use it for, what they're not allowed to use it for, what are they feeding into this application? Because a lot of people will just put in their business data and call it a day and say, oh, great, this is a chat app. I can create this as a chat bot for my website and it'll be able to answer all my clients' questions. So why do I need customer success, for example? And then understanding kind of the risks involved with that. It's a hard answer to really give because the more guardrails you put in place, the more likely someone is going to try to bypass them regardless. So I would say the best way to kind of answer that is to start off with training. But I'll let either Steve or Parul kind of answer that from a overarching perspective and say if they have anything else to contribute.
Parul, from your point of view, identity and access management may be one of the controls that you put in place. What other controls would you use?
With regards to AI specifically, right?
AI and outside data controls or outside vendor data management.
Yeah. Well, speaking a little bit with the AI side of things and identity access management, I think one of the biggest concerns with AI right now is this advanced capability for generative AI to create these social engineering attacks and be able to take your credentials through this method, right? And so being able to educate users on acceptable use is really the biggest focus that we are seeing right now. So that kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying right now, Ryan. That's kind of the stage we're at. So all these states and federal laws are coming down quickly, and some already in place. There's a quick turnaround time now from the state of New York that you have to report any incidents within 3 days. And according to the SEC, public organizations have to report within 4 days. So the idea there is to nip these attacks in the bud or attempt to, or at least understand the root cause quickly. And that is the big focus here with that. So with generative AI being so advanced in these sophisticated scams, social engineering attacks, malware development has become so much easier. It is critical that users know what they can and cannot use AI for. And that the main thing is do not, use AI. Like AI is not meant to replace human decision making. It's meant to enhance it. And I think that's the point that we really need to drive with acceptable use of AI. as these laws trickle down, healthcare the healthcare industry was going to have some requirements, finance industry is going to have some requirements, but I think the gold standard is really just going to be NIST and those federal regulations, because they're going to trickle down inevitably across the board. It's just a matter of to what extent are they abiding to federal versus state versus personal, industry requirements.
I'll add on to that real quick before Steve jumps in and say that NIST has already published their framework for AI. So does ISO 42001. It becomes a challenge to actually implement it now, because how many people do you actually know how to implement that, right? And then that's the fluidity of it. Like Parul just said, the nature of AI changes day to day, right? And so constantly being aware of what's going on in the environment is also partially a way to prevent against it. Steve?
Sorry about that. I lost control of my mouse for a second. Steve, what are some of the ways that you drive behavioral changes around understanding and using AI in an acceptable way?
Yeah. The two pieces I already talked about from the policy standpoint, from the training standpoint, are fantastic. The third piece of that is, if you're going to have a policy, if you're going to do training, again, don't think that stupid users aspect of it. How are you then putting mitigations in place? There is an emerging market around AI tools that are starting to protect it, where it can lock down accounts and just say, okay, we're aware of this. If you're going to use this, you have to use our business ChatGPT login. You can't go to personal. If you do inside of our network, you're going to end up getting blocked. So that you got to start putting in those compensating controls where possible. Again, when you're going on awareness, it's that give them the context of why. Why is this important to us as a company? But I'm going to go back to an example that got posted here. A company called Daz, their CEO, posted screenshots of her interaction with Gong. So LLM, we've had AI around for a long time. It's just the LLMs are getting better. We've got a lot of data, but there's still bias. There's still problems. So for 100%, you cannot take the people out of it. I can't, people, if you want to bookmark something from this whole meeting, take her comment and tattoo that somewhere. AI is not replacing the human. You have to still have that interaction. So the transcript she posted of their phone call, it incorporated episodes from The Crown, and it was having this dialogue back and forth, like pretending that they were interviewing the royal family. And she's like, "What the hell?" And so she tagged the Gong CEO on it. He's like, "I take it you weren't watching The Crown in the background," which she said no. Then he's like, "Then apparently my LLM was hallucinating." Because it's great. There's always so be thoughtful. Any new technology or any technology out there, be thoughtful in its use. Focus on the compensating controls for you as a company, and not expecting the vendor to take care of all the problems for you, expecting you users to always be safe and do the right thing, because they've got their own jobs, they've got their own deadlines, they're trying to burn through stuff. Help them out as much as they can so it's not something they have to worry about, and then be able to highlight the risk. So this is where you're taking that awareness, you're taking that policy, you're putting compensating controls, and then you're tying it to your risk and reporting mechanism and using that line all the way through. That's how you're going to drive effective change. That's how you're going to actually drive where the executives understand they can do a top-down approach versus trying to do everything bubbling up. Because if your executives don't care, then their leadership's not going to care, and they're not going to pass that down and hold people accountable within their own organization to do the right thing, from going through a standard procurement process and having securities reviewed to not using their own ChatGPT logins and everything in between. You got to connect the dots all the way through and build that holistic program to make it happen. And it's a lot of work, which is why we get burned out doing it, but we're insane enough to keep coming back time and time again.
Parul, you mentioned social engineering attacks, phishing attacks. What are some of the recommendations or safeguards we can put in place, potentially even using generative AI or AI to prevent these types of attacks?
Yeah. Again, maybe you can leverage generative AI to give you some advice on how to train, but definitely want to drive the point home with human review to that. So it's really just at the grassroots level, being able to educate your users and educate your personnel for what is acceptable use for AI and what is not. And like Bloomberg, for example, a report came out that with generative AI, phishing emails are up 1,200% and credential theft is up 900%. So it's a big impact that generative AI is making in terms of these attacks. These are just specific numbers tied to it. So it really is, if your users are empowered to understand what to use it for and what not to use it for, what information to give it, what not to give it, how to recognize bias or ethical concerns and report it to the correct party, which should be established by your organization. And that information should be dispersed so everyone knows who to go to with those issues. Then you have equipped yourself in the best way possible at this point in time to ensure at least that the organization is educated on what's going on. And if there are issues, you have some guardrails to address it.
Ryan, did you want to add anything to that topic?
No, I think Parul covered it all.
Well, okay, so we have a user comment with regards to the use of RAG or regenerative augmented AI. Steve, have you ever used any of these systems, and do you think organizations are even ready to fully implement RAG type systems for protecting their organizations?
Are they ready? 100% no, in my mind, because they don't understand why they're bringing stuff in. So there's a recent study done. It was either Forbes or McKinsey, and again, my brain fritzed on me for a moment, where they asked executives who felt that they understood and could manage AI inside their company, and like 60% plus of executives said, "Oh yeah, we're all right. Like we got AI, we understand AI, we know its uses and non-uses." And then they asked the next level down of, "Are you ready and can you understand the purposes?" And that was like 20% responded affirmative. So there's this misrepresentation of like, hey, as CEOs or executives, we've read a dozen articles, so therefore we totally understand our impact and how this is going to help us. But that's never how business works. Microsoft didn't make its way in this world by actually being a great product. It sold executives that they were ready for stuff that they weren't ready for, and a product that wasn't ready to do what it was actually supposed to do. And so I have a sentiment that I use with my team. It's either learn how to surf and ride the wave or drown in the ocean, because whether they're ready for it or not, these things are coming into our organizations. We need to be aware of what their impacts and limitations and risks are, and then prepare for it, because people see them as revenue generators. Executive teams see these as ways to generate more revenue for their company and have the new buzzword. So like, whether we're ready for it or not, which I don't think we are, because we don't understand the full impact of what it can do for our business, they're still coming anyways. So just start, I hate saying the words, do your research, because there's such a negative connotation to it after COVID. But like is a security professional, keep researching the trends that are going on. Find your trusted resources that you believe are going to give you more information. But you kind of have to, you're constantly learning, keep that aspect up, because it doesn't matter how long we've been in the industry. I mean, we've been talking about killing passwords since the late 90s. We still haven't done it. But like the cycles are going to keep coming back around. But find ways to educate yourself, because whether we're ready or not, it's coming our way.
Parul, what are some of the ways that you keep educated? I think this is a great topic to pivot off of, especially for newcomers, that they learn ways to keep up and ways to advance themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that question. I use a lot of social media to be able to kind of just see what people are talking about. Reddit primarily. Reddit has a, r/cybersecurity forum. I think it's really interesting to see some of the things that people post there. Anything from 0-day attacks to a recent attack on 23andMe, where people were not required to change their passwords. And for anyone not familiar with 23andMe, it's one of those genetic tests that kind of shows you your genetic makeup from whatever background across the world. So that is that is directly DNA, PII related information that is just easily accessible due to these applications not putting in pretty basic lockdown standards around them. And for sensitive information like that, it's just, crazy to see. So Reddit is a good place to go for something like that. Building your network and using LinkedIn for what people are talking about and what they're seeing in their roles at their organization is also really helpful to me. So excited to add some of these folks to my network here.
23andMe pulled the stupid user card. That their response was, well, stupid users, they were reusing their passwords. And again, so if you want to see a great example of why not have the stupid user mentality, 23andMe's response is a great object in stupidity.
Ryan, how do you keep up with trends and how do you keep on learning?
So aside from attending conferences, doing deep dives on Reddit, I create RSS feeds. And so I pull in some of the latest buzzwords and I get curated feeds all the time. I do have a dedicated Slack channel or Teams channel, depending on the organization that I'm a part of. Additionally, I also read a lot of up and coming books that come out. I know that's old fashioned to an extent these days, but you'd be surprised at what you can't cover from just learning what's on the internet, right? And so between reading the latest books out there, subscribing to like security magazines, troving through Reddit, or just creating RSS feeds, it's some kind of combination of the two. And then attending conferences, of course, whenever possible. And
last question as we're kind of rounding out the hour, and I'll start with Steve, go to Purell, and then go to Ryan. What do you see the upcoming job market looking like, and what recommendations do you have for folks on the job market?
My recommendation is be patient. Job market sucks. Even though we say we have, again, it goes back to my comment earlier, even though we say we have we're missing a lot of personnel in security, again, everybody wants to hire the unicorn. Everybody wants to hire the person who can wear multiple hats and they don't want to pay for it. So just be patient with the market. Eventually the market will correct. Also, don't expect to come into the security market and making $200,000 a year. I did an AMA on the cybersecurity subreddit thread, and that was a lot of the questions out there. It's like, how do I, and 6 months from now, I'm only making $150,000. I'm in a freshman in university and have just learned how to touch a computer. And like, be realistic in your expectations.
Yeah, that's a tall order. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good, bro. It's all you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, with regards to entering the industry, I think certifications are nice, but it really does to me seem like, test taking abilities. I think it's really important to stay current in what's going on, and that's not super difficult in today's day and age, just because there is so much information at the tip of our fingers to be able to have. So when you're in these interviews or when you're talking to managers, it's important to know what's going on present day, because again, this is ever changing, evolving. AI has only made that more difficult or more ever changing, really. So to be on top of that, I think, is really reflective of professionals in this industry kind of knowing what they're talking about and what to be concerned about. Like, knowing emerging threats is one of the top asks from managers. So being on top of that would probably really help your case.
Ryan?
I think part of it revolves around reading the job descriptions that you apply for and understanding what they're asking for, right? Don't be afraid to kind of speak up and say, this is kind of not what I fit into. Or if you notice something like we talked about earlier, like a combination of different profiles, for example, don't be afraid to kind of speak up about it, because like Steve said, just be patient. Your ideal role is coming. Certifications are great, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything beyond being able to really take a test, right? Educating yourself, as Parul mentioned earlier, is really kind of the name of the game. And I think that it takes time. The market is horrible right now. I think there's a lot of competition on a variety of different roles, and ultimately, it will correct itself. It will kind of balance itself back out. We will start seeing a lot of mass hiring going on if we haven't already done so. And then, kind of really just explore the industries that are important to you. And then when you kind of relay that it's important to you, and then you kind of can show enthusiasm for it, I think that also helps you stand apart from other applicants as well.
And get over the myth that security is layoff proof.
Yes.
That's a lot of going out there right
Right.
now. I keep seeing, oh, like I'm in this because like unless you're in Fed or you're like the public sector is actually pretty decent about it. Everything outside of that, like layoffs are still happening. Security teams, as people are looking at cutting costs, they look at security and like, okay, we haven't been breached. You guys are doing a good enough job, so therefore we'll get rid of all you except for 3. So move on from the myth that security is layoff proof.
I'd also add in, if you're not directly in security, find ways that you can add value by being that security champion and by sharing security practices, if that's a field that you want to get into. Because, for example, I've seen nurses that when they go back and they go to help secure the EHR, they understand how that works. They can talk with doctors. They can have that conversation. They understand the sensitivity of medical records. With that, we're at the top of the hour. James, thank you very much for pulling us all together and having this great panel conversation.
Thank you very much, Christophe, and thank you to all of our panelists and everyone viewing who stayed with us through this time. That's a wrap on such an insightful discussion. Thank you to everyone who attended, and a huge thank you to our panel for sharing your experiences and knowledge on this important topic. We invite everyone, including our panelists, to tune in for our upcoming Startup Pitch-Off event on May 30th to hear about new startups to watch. Think This Discussion Meets Shark Tank. Be sure to follow us on our socials, on LinkedIn, on X, on Meetup, so you can be the first to know about the exciting events we have coming up this year, both virtual and in your region at the 14 different Motion offices. We look forward to seeing you all next time and next year for the same discussion. Until then, thank you very much, and we'll see you again.